still in part 4. We're still talking about God's personality, and in the last couple parts of part 4, I introduced the idea that, contrary to theology the last 2 millennia, what the Bible is actually saying about God is that God wills to be the way He is. So that when we say that God is truth and righteousness and justice, that's a will. That's a result of His will to be that way. It is not an attribute external, so to speak, to His will. Alright? Now, common sense would tell you that that's true, because you and I can will to be a certain way. We have attributes, but we can will to use them any way we want. Okay? And the Calvinists are particularly, puerile, because they're always saying, well, you can't fly. No, I can't fly, but I can do a whole lot of other things, and I can use them well or ill. Dummy. So the first thing about God is that He's infinite will. The next thing about God is, because He's infinite will, He's obviously infinitely omnipresent, and He's infinitely omnipotent. Okay? Everything else is what He chooses to do with those attributes. So if He's truth, it's because of what He wills truth to be. He could will against truth if He wanted. If He's righteousness, it's because He wills it. If He's justice, it's because He wills it. Alright? And, there's always been a theological debate about God's attributes and what's first and second and blah, 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 because the theologians are all like in the theological playpen with this. They're not thinking. Of course, they're not using 1 John 1:9, so, it doesn't matter how many degrees they have or how smart they are, even with the original languages, seeing they don't see, hearing they don't hear. Okay, everything stems from will. God wills. So God wills that you exist. So God wills that you have free will just like He does. And He ensures it. Duh. Okay, I can't fly. But with whatever I have, I can will to do what I want with it. I can take these hands and I can kill somebody, or I can take these hands and make dinner. Alright? So God can take His abilities, because they're abilities He has. And He can do whatever He wants with them. He could use His omniscience to create lies if He wanted. He would still be omniscient, but He knows what a truth is, He knows what a lie is, and He could choose for the lie. Essentially, that's what Satan's doing. Satan can't stand the truth. What God does is more shocking, and this is where you can sort of empathize with Satan, is God chooses truth to be free to be bad. This is what Satan's big argument against God really is. Of course, we don't know anything about Satan because we don't know anything about God. Satan depicts himself as a Messiah, really. He's the good guy in his mind. He wants to save us from God because God has elected the truth be free to be bad. Satan would have that not be so. Satan would eliminate all bad. Okay? One of the guys that actually started to figure that out was a fellow named Louis Sperry Schaeffer. I think is his correct pronunciation. He was, I believe he was one of the founders of Dallas Theological Seminary. But you can look him up on the internet. He wrote a lot about this business about Satan, and he sort of figured that out. So it's not like there's nobody who's ever figured it out, but you don't hear this stuff discussed. And so all of our ideas about God and Satan and why we're here are all screwed up. And that's why I'm talking and yapping like I am. Okay, so let's think about this thing about how God is. We've got enough knowledge. You can even not know Bible and still work this out in your brain. Okay? God would be infinite, so then that equates to an omnipresence relative to finite creation. God would be omniscient. If He's infinite, He's omniscient. So He would know what good and bad is, what He wants good and bad to be versus what it would be if He didn't gerrymander it. He knows what He would do about it and how He would interact with it. Okay? And He has a choice total free will to do whatever he wants with whatever he is. And of course, he has an unlimited power to create. This person, then, can choose to be righteous or not, can choose to be just or not. And Satan's big argument is that God isn't righteous or just. He can choose to be truth or not. Alright? It's a choice for him. It's a use of his beingness. And he can therefore, since he has unlimited power to create, he can create things that are bad or good. And in fact, he takes the responsibility for creating Satan himself. That's Isaiah 45:7. I myself created the evil one. It's not created evil, it's created the evil one. My pastor spent a lot of time exegeting that, so you can go get his lessons if you want. Okay? So God has total power. And it's a question of what he does with who he is. And what he does with who he is the most shocking thing of all, the thing you would least expect. Of course, our ideas of God are pretty much the opposite of the way he is. You would expect that as God, he'd be so hot on how powerful he is that he'd want to just make everything nice and nothing could deviate from his standard. Well, he made the opposite choice. He ordained everything to be free, bad or good, and he ensures the bad. That's Isaiah 45:7. He ensures the bad just as much as he ensures the good. He ensures sin. He ensures its ability to live. He ensures its ability to have its effects. He ensures its ability to go on forever. And that's the essence of the cross. Sin never really changes. When the sins came into Christ, he had a counter-thinking. The counter-thinking is what Paperson's Bedato Yatstik in Isaiah 53:11. It didn't change the sin. It didn't change its existence. It didn't change its play in history. It didn't change anything because omniscience didn't want to change what God wants to know. He wants everything to be free. And he could turn off something that he knows if he wanted to because he's totally omnipotent. He can do whatever he wants. But he doesn't want to. That's what's so shocking. So the cross is the insurance of bad's existence. The justification for its existence is that when the bad comes into Christ, he's basically paying the whole opportunity cost of creation, including the angels, I'm sorry. He has a counter thought that is so beautiful that it justifies the existence of the bad because the counter thought is going to be there on the cross. And again, the cross is always happening to omniscience. So that moment of the joining of Christ's counter thought per every sin that's coming into him as an imputation, that's constantly there. God is constantly seeing King James Version as sweet savor. And that's a really good term because it smells good to see the counter thought. And therefore the bad is justified to exist because the counter thought will be its reply. Right? So God is not shaving anything. That's the key to God's personality. It's what's a khalil khala. We must fulfill all righteousness. That was in Matthew 3, I think. Everything, it's righteous for freedom to exist. So it's righteous that a bad thing be free to exist and have its own free effects, its own life, and its own death, and its own consequences. And that is why bad is insured, because the cross is going to be there. Christ is going to counterthink. And the value of his thinking is so high that it's worth it that the bad thing continue to exist freely. Therefore, there are no limits, because everything bad is allowed to exist and have its own life, and therefore everything good replying to everything bad. So that you got all the high and all the low. Best married to worst. Okay? Now, that means that righteousness and justice and love are all God's decisions, his choices about what he wants to be and how he wants to live. And it also means that God is constantly, as it were, closest thing there can be to it, killing himself for the sake of love, righteousness, and justice. You got to think about that, and I wrote a webpage on it. The link will be in the sidebar.